Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something really fascinating. We're going to objectively unpack some incredibly bold claims from a recent, highly partisan source regarding a 60-day strategic neutralization of Iran. The source material makes these really massive assertions about a major shift in the Middle East, presenting it not just as a temporary pause in the fighting, but as a total structural victory. Now, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, understanding how this narrative is being constructed and argued is absolutely essential. So, we've broken down all the key claims, the data points, and the logic from the source into a clear visual deck to help us grasp exactly what is being argued.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap for today. We'll be covering 5 key areas. First, the 14-point peace deal. Second, the Hormuz counter-blockade. Third, the resulting military and economic squeeze. Fourth, 3 global strategic goals. And finally, we'll look at the domestic political fallout. Let's get right to it.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, the 14-point peace deal.
So, the entire analysis we're looking at today centers around this incredibly comprehensive Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. According to the source, this 14-point document was hammered out between U.S. leadership alongside Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. The terms? Well, they're pretty steep. We're talking an immediate cessation of hostilities across all fronts, a solid commitment to free and unimpeded passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and, this is the really crucial one, the verifiable dismantling of Iran's nuclear weapons program right there on Iranian soil, totally supervised by the IAEA. But, a deal like this needs some serious incentives, right? The rewards for Iran's compliance are built around performance-based sanctions relief specifically on crude oil exports. That offers them a concrete pathway to lifting those broader economic sanctions. Grasping these terms is so important because they form the foundational baseline of what the source calls a total structural disarmament.
And that brings us to the magic number $300 billion. I mean, wow. This staggering financial incentive is framed by the source as the ultimate carrot. It basically puts a $300 billion price tag on peace, all wrapped up in a proposed reconstruction framework that is entirely contingent on strict, verifiable, step-by-step compliance.
Moving right along to part 2, the Hormuz counter-blockade.
Now, you might be wondering, why would Iran even accept these terms? Well, the analysis points directly to one specific spot on the map, the Strait of Hormuz. It's just a narrow 21-mile channel, but a massive 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply passes right through it. The claim here is that for 47 years, Iran constructed its entire geopolitical identity and its whole military apparatus around threatening this single vital asset. The strategy was to make the strait so terrifying, with the looming threat of skyrocketing global oil prices and economic shock, that no U.S. administration would ever dare push them to the brink. It was essentially their ultimate trump card.
And this brilliantly illustrates the shift. For decades, the absolute worst-case scenario was an Iranian blockade triggering a global energy shock. We're talking $200 a barrel for oil. But the new strategy? It completely flipped the script. According to the commentator, the U.S. actually wanted Iran to close the strait. They turned Iran's ultimate trump card into an immediate trap by launching a massive U.S. naval counterblockade. This effectively cut off Iran's own ports and their ability to export their own oil. Crazy, right?
The math on this trap was just absolutely inexorable. Every single 24-hour period the strait stayed closed, $500 million in desperately needed oil revenue just vanished for Iran, $500 million a day. So, by turning their ultimate weapon into an economic trap, the longer the strait remained closed, the faster the Iranian economy was basically destroying itself.
Which seamlessly leads us into part 3, the military and economic squeeze used to enforce this trap.
So how do they actually pull this off? The source lays it out as a rapid, sequential 3-step process. Step 1. Defang Iran militarily right out of the gate. Within just the first 2 weeks of conflict, U.S. and Israeli forces reportedly destroyed nearly $1 trillion in Iranian military infrastructure. That means wiping out their air force, their navy, and a staggering 90% of their missile capacity. Then, with Iran rendered militarily inert, Step 2 launched that devastating economic counter-blockade we just talked about. And finally, Step 3. U.S. forces enact sustained escort operations, securely shepherding commercial vessels right through the strait, while the newly defanged Iranian forces could really only sit back and watch.
The source actually compares this to a rear-naked chokehold in a UFC fight, just inescapable pressure. The central bank went into a total freefall. Frozen assets remained completely locked up, and crucially, China quietly walked away from the table. It was this total economic depletion that ultimately forced Iran to offer to open Hormuz permanently. Your big takeaway here is how overwhelming military dominance was utilized purely as a setup for inescapable economic leverage.
Shifting gears to the broader scorecard, in Part 4, 3 global strategic goals.
So this 60-day window reportedly achieved 3 massive global victories. Victories that apparently deeply upset interventionist neoconservatives because it charted a completely different path. Goal 1, removing the principled impediment to the Abraham Accords by decimating the proxy network. That includes Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Goal 2, permanently boxing China out of the Middle East by neutralizing its primary proxy. And Goal 3, totally recalibrating global energy geopolitics around American dominance. It's really worth noting here that the U.S. has now emerged as the world's largest oil and gas exporter.
Now, you really have to compare the expectations with the claimed reality here. For years, critics have been warning of a decades-long forever war, resulting in mass casualties in this huge Middle Eastern quagmire. But the claimed outcome here is vastly different. The source boldly asserts we're looking at a total rearrangement of the Middle Eastern chessboard, and it was achieved with just 60 days of air power, a naval blockade, absolutely zero ground troops, and exceptionally low casualties. Literally the opposite of a forever war.
Finally, let's wrap up with Part 5, domestic political fallout.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the polling data. A lot of political analysts predicted that this kind of conflict would fracture the MAGA coalition, especially among the non-interventionists. But looking at the numbers cited by the source, that split just never materialized. We're seeing overwhelming approval for this foreign policy maneuver. 100% from NBC polls, 98% from Fox News, and 91% from YouGov. So the political base remained remarkably unified despite the incredibly intense military action.
So tying it all together, the source describes this whole situation as an absolute masterclass in leverage architecture. The argument is that this isn't just some fragile piece of paper waiting to be violated. It is structural disarmament. It's driven by that massive carrot we discussed and a totally crushing stick, where the looming threat of instantly reapplying that counterblockade acts as constant, built-in enforcement.
Which leaves us with one seriously crucial question to ponder. Will this leverage architecture truly reshape the Middle East permanently, or is this really just a temporary pause in a much, much larger historical conflict? That's the ultimate takeaway you should be keeping an eye on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.